The goal kick. This is Kyle. He is a 12-year-old beginner goalkeeper with an outcome of being the first choice goalkeeper for the Metropolitan team. Kyle isn't a bad player, however he has difficulty when kicking the ball for a goal kick. He struggles to get enough power to kick the ball a long distance from the goal square and loses balance throughout his kick. Looking at the phases of a kick, we will evaluate his errors and incorporate constraints to show decay within his kicking skills and improve his overall performance. In order to become first choice player, Kyle set himself the process goal of performing a consistent kicking technique to overall achieve his process goal of achieving a goal kick to the halfway line. In achieving these goals, hopefully he makes the top pick. Today the kick is broken down into 3 phases to individually implement constraints to improve Kyle's goal kick. In phase 1, we'll first look at Kyle's approach. In phase 2, the block step. And in phase 3, leg swing and contact. The first phase in the goal kick is the approach. This phase is where linear momentum is formed, which is then transferred to angular momentum through a rotation of the hip joint on the sagittal plane of the body as the kicking leg generates force that is transferred onto the ball. The approach is an important step in the kick as the angle in which the ball is approached at affects the angle in which the hip joint can open up and the base leg can be bent to generate the angular momentum and velocity needed to result in an effective kick. When looking at Kyle's kick, he demonstrates a straight and narrow approach to the ball, which is ineffective in generating enough momentum for the ball to go far or result in a powerful kick. A straight and narrow approach involves often small and short steps, which does not allow maximum momentum and does not allow the body to generate maximum peak force velocity upon the ball. Approaching the ball with short and small steps on the straight and narrow does not allow the body much flexibility in the movement and prevents the leg from bending on the base and the hip joint from being able to open. An effective approach is performed from a 45-degree angle. This results in larger steps as well as allows the planting leg to be bent, thus allowing the hip joint to open up upon the leg following through to make contact with the ball. The bent leg acts as an anchor as the body generates angular momentum through the hip joint as it opens up and follows back through with the leg swing, from which the force is then exerted onto the ball. A 45-degree angle is needed to create angular momentum, which transfers to maximum peak force velocity, which without will result in a less effective goal kick for Kyle. To improve Kyle's approach, the constraint of adding in markers can be used as a guideline of where to move to allow the grounding leg to bend and ultimately open up the hip joint. By setting out the markers in a 45-degree angle, Kyle can see at what point he needs to start and where across the angle he needs to go to position his body to generate optimal momentum. When looking at Kyle's movement as he uses this constraint, you can see that he now has a bent base leg. You can also see his hip has opened up, resulting in a much better kick. To further improve this constraint, Kyle can time his movements and aim for a quicker approach through his steps to generate more force through his kick. A faster time will mean a faster and further kick.
The second stage of the goal kick in football is the block step. In the block step, there are various biomechanical elements that constitute successful achievement in the desired outcome. The overall goal for the performer in this movement is to achieve stability through the kick. Firstly, stability is achieved through a controlled center of gravity. This will be shown by the performer raising their arms to distribute their center of gravity over a larger area, contributing to a greater sense of stability. A second important factor of the block step deals with forces that are generated through the movement. In a block step, many joints are used to combine to produce maximum effect through the summation of forces. Under the assumption that the performer is right-footed, the sequencing of muscles starts at the larger muscles. In the block step, this includes the abdominal muscles, erector spinae, and spinal posterior muscles. This allows for stabilization of the upper trunk when performing the kick. The sequencing then travels down to the right hip, where the rectus femoris, gluteus, and sartorius perform an internal rotation of the hip joint. The gluteus maximus and hamstring muscles are extending the left hip at this point in time. The sequence then travels down to each of the knee joints. The right knee and left knee are extended by the quadricep groups on each leg. The right ankle then participates in a plantar flexion, while the left shoulder participates in a horizontal abduction. The right ankle at this point is preparing itself for the absorption of force, while the left shoulder is stabilizing the upper trunk. This is done by the muscles in the shoulder, the anterior deltoid, biceps brachii, and pectoralis major. The sequence of muscles must be well timed to allow for the correct amount of force generated. This is because forces that are generated through this movement must be channeled and controlled to suit the demands of the task. The first force, being linear momentum, is generated through the angle of approach. However, this is transferred to angular momentum through rotation of the hip joint along the sagittal axis. This is achieved through the acceleration of the leg by the quadriceps and hip flexors. In addition to this, moderate tension of the muscles and tendons must be made to receive the impact when contact with the ball is created. The knee is also bent to limit damage on the knee joint. Not having a leg brace could lead to more damage to the knee or ankle joints. Another important factor is the relationship between the plant foot direction and the direction that the ball will travel. Optimization of this occurs when the plant foot is perpendicular to the line of flight in the center of the ball for a straight kick. In addition to this, Hay describes the ideal mediolateral orientation of the foot to be between 5 and 10 centimeters to the left, assuming a right-footed kicker. If the planting foot is greater than this distance, the performing center of gravity will be compromised. If it is lesser, the kick is not as effective otherwise. The constraint that is to be implemented to the performer is a simple marker that is 10 centimeters to the left of the ball for a right-footed kicker. This is a task constraint that involves the instructor telling the performer to step aside this place marker. The idea behind this constraint is to ensure the learner is at an optimal distance from the ball that will create a better sense of gravity for this performer. This will allow the performer to maintain momentum and generate acceleration through the kick. The instructor must ensure at this point that they are telling the performer to focus on the task of stepping beside the marker. This is setting an achievable target skill that the performer can focus on while they are performing the task. This is with the intention that the performer has a process-oriented goal of being able to kick accurately and effectively through a soccer ball. After some practice with stepping on the mark, the nature of the constraint will change. The performer will remove the mark and instead place sand on the ground. The outcome being that the sand will provide a measurable result that will show the constraint has been effective in modifying the performance of the learner. In the initial stages, the constraint will be awkward as it has caused an instability with the learner's sequence of muscle coordination. However, as the learner becomes more proficient in the acquisition of the skill, they will reach a state of degeneracy where they will be able to increase power and accuracy through the kick. In addition to this, another indicator that would prove that the constraint has proven effective is the rising of the left arm for a right-footed person. This is to show that the learner has understood balance and the center of gravity has become part of their kicking routine.
The last part of the goal kick sequence is the swinging of the leg and the contact with the foot and the ball. In order for the movement to be successful, the sequential summation of forces for the different stages of the movement must occur to produce enough torque around the fulcrums to allow the ball to travel. The first movement is the backswing or the swing limb loading. This is where the movement and the torque potential is gathered. This involves plantar flexion in the ankle due to a concentric contraction of the gastrocnemius, and flexion of the knee or patella produced by concentric contraction of the hamstring muscle, while the quadriceps acts as the antagonist. Flexion of the knee also allows for elastic energy to be stored through the knee extensors to produce greater velocity on the downward phase of the swing. The glutes also contract to produce abduction and external rotation of the hip. Eccentric extension of the hip flexors also contributes to higher elastic potential to be stored and therefore higher velocity produced. Extension of the hip flexors and rotation of the pelvis allows for angular movement of the hips. This allows for the kicking thigh to be brought posteriorly along the sagittal plane about the frontal axis. As the thigh moves forward through a concentric contraction of the quadriceps, the foot accelerates due to momentum and the release of the store of elasticity. The velocity of the foot speed is determined by rotational torque around the hip flexion and strength of contraction of the knee extensors while the knee is extending. Lees et al. States that foot swing velocity has a direct impact on ball velocity. This aligns with Newton's second law, which states the acceleration of an object is determined to the amount of force applied to it. As the foot swings towards the ball, plantar flexion of the ankle of the kicking foot occurs, allowing the first metatarsal to be aimed at the target area of the ball. The final stage is the follow-through. The premise of the follow-through is to make contact with the ball for as long as possible. Garrett and Kirkendall states that this allows for greater momentum to be transferred through the ball as kinetic energy. After initial contact with the ball, there is still knee extension and hip flexion as the foot strikes through the ball, but all the elastic energy dissipates as the foot decelerates. As the foot heads back towards the ground, there are eccentric contractions from the hip extensors and knee flexors. The glutes eccentrically contract at the hip to abduct and medially rotate at the hip. The hamstrings also eccentrically flex at the knee. Newton's first law states that the ball will stay at rest unless an unbalanced force acts upon it, and it will stay in motion unless a force stops it. In this example, the unbalanced force comes from Kyle's kick, and the resistance force is gravity. Kyle makes contact off-centre of the ball to the right of the ball. This causes the ball to spin from right to left. This results in a greater velocity of air passing through the left side of the ball, as the grooves in the ball cause friction which pull air particles with it. Bernoulli's principle states that as air moves faster along the surface, the air pressure will decrease, and when the air moves slower, it has greater air pressure. When this occurs, there is an imbalance in the pressure exerted on the two sides, and the ball deflects or curves to the side with less air pressure. This is known as the Magnus effect. This is because fluids tend to move from areas of high pressure to low pressure in an attempt to achieve equilibrium. Due to the age and level of Kyle, a task constraint suggested by Newell has been deemed the most coordination pattern with this movement. This task constraint involves placing a ball on a cone. A strength of his movement is that Kyle occasionally strikes the ball with the ideal path. However, as previously explained, the issue with this movement is that he imparts force through the side of the ball instead of underneath and centre. Here I am explaining to Kyle the ball will be placed on a cone to afford him the opportunity to strike underneath the ball, and a target zone will be painted on the ball to afford him the opportunity to release degrees of freedom to strike through the centre of the ball. As you can see, the emergent behaviour is that the ball travels straight and high. Decay of the movement is apparent as the paint from the ball has transferred to the boot. Degeneracy has occurred as there is no instability or performing this movement with the constraint in place. This will be due to Kyle kicking underneath the ball, imparting backspin on the ball. With Bernoulli's principle and the Magnus effect in mind, this causes the ball to lift. The theory of goal setting will be used as a psychological foundation of this intervention. The target skill Kyle wants to establish is the goal kick. He can achieve this by setting his process goal, or the target behaviour, as building torque for the summation of forces from his hip rotation, knee and ankle joints to effectively strike through the ball. The performance goal is for Kyle to kick the ball high and straight. This will be measured to see if he can reach the edge of the D of the centre circle. This has been chosen as it is challenging, attainable, realistic and specific. The outcome goal would be for Kyle to use this skill effectively in a game situation and be picked as the first choice keeper for his team, which is the target context. The secondary constraint to tighten the original constraints are to decrease the target zone of the white paint and to make the action of getting the foot underneath the ball harder as the golf tees are closer to the ground than the cone. Decay is apparent when Kyle replicates the successful goal kick with the tighter constraints and the paint mark still appears on the ball on his foot in the optimal area. It is apparent here as the first kick is high and swings to the left, but the second kick goes high and straight. Degeneracy is apparent when the constraints are taken away and Kyle can still produce the goal kick movement with optimal stability. The constraints-based learning experience can be seen as a success as he has achieved his performance goal as the ball travelled around 35 yards, which would be equivalent of the kicking the ball to the edge of the D.